Hello everyone, my name is Bea and I'm an English teacher. I've been an English teacher for over 30 years and one of my favourite levels to prepare my students for is B2. So I'm going to be talking about different ways in which to improve your techniques, your abilities, specifically for the B2 exam. Can I take this opportunity on behalf of myself and all the Exams Factory team to wish you all the very best with your English studies and of course in the B2 exam. We're going to be having a look at some writing tips for B2 and I really hope they're useful for you. Remember that you don't have to sort of adopt all the tips I give you at the same time, but you might like to try one or two of them and see how you get on. Let's start with tip number one. Now, it sounds pretty obvious, but when I tell my students this, they're sometimes a little bit surprised. Make sure that you are familiar with all the different types of writings for B2, because it's really, really important, and I'm going to say 3 words: practice, practice, practice. It all comes down to practice. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you need to get as much practice as possible with all the different writing options. Now, how can you do this? Well, those of you who have teachers, maybe you're at school, maybe you're learning at an academy, your teacher will probably be teaching you how to write those different types of writings and will be able to help you with the corrections. However, those of you who might be preparing for this exam independently, and those of you who aren't going to an academy or don't have a teacher, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how on earth can I know if I'm making mistakes with my writing? Who's going to help me? Well, the good news is that we have something, I'm going to suggest something called the Cambridge Write and Improve service. And this is a totally free online tool which you can use. And I really recommend that you go to the Cambridge website and you have a look and try it out. Of course, anyone can use it. So even if you do have a teacher, even if you are going to an academy, you can still use it as well. Something which is associated with practice, practice, practice is that please don't be one of those people who suddenly decides to do 25 different writings in the last week before the exam date. Why isn't that a good idea? Well, basically our brains need time to process information. We need time to, process any feedback our teachers give us so that when we do the same kind of writing the next time around, we can implement those suggestions, those corrections to see if we can improve. Enjoy. Let's go on with tip number 2. Now, I don't know about you, but I really like cooking and I really like trying new recipes. And at home I have loads of recipe books and it's something that really relaxes me. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why is she talking about cooking when we're actually talking about B2 writing? Well, there is a connection, believe it or not. Let's imagine you decide to try out a new recipe. When you decide to do this, you probably make sure that you get all your ingredients. You probably make sure you weigh all the ingredients, and you probably have a little plan of the order of the ingredients. And that's where the connection is. Writing at B2 is exactly the same as following a recipe. If you start cooking with a recipe and you don't prepare, what's going to happen? The end result of your recipe is going to be a disaster. And I hate to tell you this, but if you do the same with your B2 writing, it's going to be the same. So, where am I going with this? You need to make a plan. Because if you don't make a plan when you're writing, your writing, in all probability, is going to be a little bit chaotic and a little bit disorganized. Remember the cooking and the recipe comparison. So, for example, what I would recommend, let's think about the essay, the compulsory part. Part 1 for the essay. Get your highlighter pen, and remember, if it's paper-based, you've got your physical highlighter pen. If you're doing the digital, you also have a highlighter tool on your computer. What you could do is, before you even start writing, highlight the key vocabulary. You would be amazed at how many people don't include all the answer, all the information they need to include in their answer. What I would like you to do then is to highlight and to brainstorm some ideas for your essay before you start writing. So the recommended times would be take 5 minutes of the exam to plan, maybe 30 minutes writing, and then if you've got 5 minutes at the end, you could spend 5 minutes checking. You probably have enough time to do all of that within the time limit. Okay, so always remember, cooking recipe, B2 writing, there is a connection. Tip number 3 is a tip which I'd like to make about time management. Now, if you're thinking, what is time management? Well, it's basically how we organize our time for every part of the exam, but in this case, specifically for the writing. As you already know, you have about 40 minutes to write your writing in this part of the exam. So what I'd like to suggest is that you're not one of these people who wastes this valuable time writing a rough copy and then transferring that rough copy information to your answer booklet. The answer booklet is what gets sent to Cambridge. So any rough paper you have, we throw away. That does not get sent to Cambridge. If you're transferring information from a rough copy to your answer booklet, it's going to take you about 10 minutes. What does that mean? Well, that means it's going to take valuable time away from you. Instead of planning or correcting or checking your ideas, you're going to be wasting your valuable time. And I have a bit of a horror story. Last year, one of my students had written something very, very good, she told me. She wrote a rough copy and she ran out of time. She didn't have enough time to transfer to her booklet. So she had to hand in a half-completed essay in her booklet. And unfortunately, she failed the writing as a result. So don't be one of those people. The thing is, I've also seen some people writing initially in pencil in the answer booklet and then going over the pencil with pen. Now remember, the answer booklet answers get sent to Cambridge and they are scanned. If somebody has written in pencil and on the top of that they've written it in pen, it's going to be very difficult for the examiner, the person correcting your work, to read what you've written. So the message here, don't waste valuable time transferring. Also be careful, write directly in pen in your answer booklet. What I would suggest is to train yourself at home, set a timer, 40 minutes, take a writing and time yourself to see how you feel or how it feels to take 40 minutes to do a writing in English. Tip 4. What I'm going to say to you isn't rocket science. It's nothing you haven't heard before. But there is an incredibly strong connection between reading and writing. If you read, obviously, you're going to broaden your lexical range. What I mean is that you're going to learn more vocabulary. You're going to know how sentences are constructed. So, what I recommend, because there is a connection between writing and reading, I'm not going to recommend that you should read a book a week in English. No. What I would recommend is that you take 10 minutes a day, just 10 minutes, to read something in English. It could be a little article, it could be a blog. And I suggest that while you're doing that, you highlight any new words. You look up the new words which you don't understand. You could translate the words into your own language. And what you could do also is to look at the new words in your article or the blog and to think of synonyms which you could replace instead of the words in the article. And what I then suggest is when you've done that, you write a little summary in English, of course, of what you've just written. And I really promise you that 10 minutes out of your busy day, doing a little reading and a little bit of writing practice is going to improve your writing skill, expand your lexical range, and help you with your sentence construction. 10 minutes, that's all it is every day. Tip 5. One of the things which I mentioned earlier was the importance of practice, practice, practice. Do you remember the 3 words? That the more you practice your writing for the B2 exam, the easier it's going to be for you to identify any of your typical mistakes. For example, are you one of those people who says people is instead of people are when you're writing? Are you one of those people who often forgets the third person S when you're writing? Obviously, the more you practice your writing, the more feedback you get from your teacher or from the Cambridge Write and Improve service, you'll be able to identify your typical mistakes, whatever those mistakes are. So you could create a little personalized checklist which you could use after you have finished doing your writing, just to have a look and to check that you're not making your typical mistakes. I really hope that all of those tips are useful. And remember what I said at the beginning, even if you just start out with one of those tips, you might find it useful. Good luck in your B2 writing and all the very best with your English studies on behalf of myself and all the Exams Factory team.
Exams Factory, your best Cambridge exam experience.